Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a presentation titled Accelerating Rapid Test Development for COVID-19 Through Manufacturing Scale-Up and Open Collaboration. It's my pleasure to introduce you to David Wilson, Commercial Director of Diagnostics at Avacta Life Sciences. For a complete biography on our speaker, please visit the tab at the top of your screen. Now, if any questions arise during the presentation, we want to encourage you to submit them in the Q&A box. Our speaker will address your questions following the end of the presentation. Please join me now in welcoming David Wilson. I will now turn the presentation over to him. Welcome, David.
Thank you for that introduction. Today, I'm going to talk about the rapid development of COVID-19 rapid diagnostics, and specifically accelerating the rapid test development and manufacturing scale-up through open collaboration. I'd just like to start with a review of the webinar, which is captured in the abstract to the webinar, as it pulls out some of the key themes I would like to address in today's webinar. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought unprecedented challenges. These are unique challenges to the in vitro diagnostics industry. And in turn, that provides both unique opportunities to demonstrate the value of diagnostic testing and a strong diagnostics industry, but at the same time, unique challenges, which I will address, and they include the accelerated development of tests, the significant scale-up of manufacturing to meet unprecedented demand, and how this is being managed by the industry through open, pre-competitive collaboration with multiple stakeholders, not just amongst industry players, but also other stakeholders such as governments, supply chain, regulatory agencies, funding bodies, etc. And ultimately, why the diagnostics industry will emerge from this a much stronger industry. And this will be one of the enduring legacies of the pandemic. So I will address why this is both an opportunity, what the key challenges are, how the industry is rising to those challenges, and the legacy of this in terms of the strength of the diagnostics industry and the value of the industry as perceived by governments. So starting with why this is a unique opportunity. IVDs, for a long time, certainly in my lifetime working in the industry, which is now nearly 30 years, IVDs have traditionally been undervalued by healthcare systems. They really sat in the shadow of therapeutics and other medtech markets, and that's despite their value to healthcare systems. However, the COVID-19 pandemic highlights the leading roles that IVDs can play in overcoming global health challenges, and now why the development of a stronger diagnostics capability has become a strategic priority for many governments across the world. I will talk a lot from the perspective of the UK, which is where I'm based, but I think the messages apply to other countries as well. So looking at how IVDs are undervalued by healthcare systems, there is the statistic which is has been around for a while, that diagnostic decisions, or diagnostic tests rather, influence 70% of clinical decisions, yet only less than 1% of healthcare budgets are dedicated to the use of new and innovative diagnostic products. And you could question why that is, and that is one of the main reasons why we feel in the diagnostics industry that IVDs are significantly undervalued. There's a famous quote by Alan Merrier, who's the chairman of the Merrier Foundation, which kind of captured it without a diagnosis. Medicine is blind. So you would think that the use of diagnostics and the value of diagnostics would be perceived much higher than it currently is. And this slide, I know it's a busy slide. This is data from the top 15 European IVD markets, and you might be able to see in the second column to the right, to the end. This is the IVD market as a percentage of the total healthcare spend, and you will see in most cases it's less than 1%, and the average for the total EU 15 is 0.6%. And then if you look at the last column, and this is the spend on diagnostics per capita, and the average for the EU 15 is, just short of 23 euros per person. And in the UK, and the UK is the second largest economy in Europe, second largest GDP, and the diagnostic spend per capita is the lowest at just under 15 euros per person. So why is this? Why are IVDs undervalued by healthcare systems? Well, there are lots of reasons. They probably vary from country to country, but one key one is the central one on this slide, is it really a lack of understanding of how the use of IVDs can lead to a more effective and rapid and accurate diagnosis, which enables you to tailor patient care. In other words, you can manage patients appropriately, send them down the right clinical pathways. And when care is being commissioned or diagnostic tests being commissioned, the benefits of diagnostics are either misunderstood or not considered at all. But with the advent now of the COVID-19 pandemic, that's changing. That perception of the value of the IVDs in general, and the industry in particular, is changing. We probably all remember the World Health Organization's mantra back when the pandemic started, to test, test, test. The WHO, believes that testing, in combination with isolation and contact tracing, is the backbone of or should be the backbone of the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And without the testing, the head of the WHO says it's not possible to fight a fire blindfolded. Almost, similar to Alan Meria's quote, "Without diagnosis, medicine is blind." So it's become, well accepted now that testing for SARS-CoV-2 and screening for COVID-19 antibodies is widely acknowledged as the key tools to manage both the human and economic impact of the global coronavirus pandemic. And it's the ability to test and test at scale in combination with access to a vaccine, which are really the key tools to enabling society to return to normal at some point in the future. And it's interesting now as well that one output of this is that diagnostic testing has become part of the national conversation. And you regularly hear on mainstream media, on television and in newspapers, discussions around concepts such as test sensitivity, specificity, and predictive values. And I provided a link here to just one such article in a UK national newspaper. And I think this is indicative of how mainstream diagnostics has become, and because of its key role in tackling the COVID-19 pandemic. And long may that last. So you can see diagnostics is starting to emerge from the shadows of therapeutics and other medtech. And it's also highlighted the integral value of diagnostics to a well-managed health and care system. Interestingly, the UK government acknowledged that the UK went into the pandemic with a shortfall in testing capacity and capability. And that was due to a lack of investment in diagnostics compared to other countries. And we've even heard some government advisors say that the UK had no home-based diagnostics industry of any note. Well, that's absolutely not true, but it does illustrate how, how invisible the diagnostics industry has been, and how a lack of investment in the industry has had an impact on the country's ability to respond quickly compared to other countries, such as Germany, for example, which is generally acknowledged to have responded better to the pandemic because it was able to scale up testing much more rapidly than other countries. So I think that's certainly in the UK, that's been recognized. And one output of that is the fact that the government have stated that they want the UK diagnostics industry to come out of this much stronger and ready to respond much more quickly. The next, hopefully, there won't be one, but it's likely there will be, responding more quickly to the next pandemic. So that's the opportunity. Let's now look at some of the challenges. Some of the key challenges are the requirement to develop products very quickly. So the requirement for a very rapid, compressed product development timeline, and at the same time to deliver effective and safe products. The pandemic was, acknowledged in December 2019. The first tests were development started in January 2020, and some of those tests were developed and reached the market in time to help fight the first wave of the pandemic. So within 6 months, but not all. And now largely most countries are into the second wave, and some of those products are coming to market in time for the second wave of the pandemic. But that requires a development timescale of a matter of a few months. And as I'll go on to show later, typically these types of products can take 2 to 3 years when they follow normal development timelines. So the challenge has been to go through that product development timeline and develop a product which is, effective, i.e. it's accurate, and also safe, but do it a lot more quickly than is traditionally done. The second challenge is the scale of the demand, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in some more detail, but it's the requirement to scale up manufacturing capacity. Manufacturing capacity is currently nowhere near sufficient to meet demand. And there's not only the requirement to scale that up, but it's to scale it up in orders of magnitude higher than it currently is, and quickly. So again, in a matter of months, when typically these scale-up activities can take, a year or more. And then finally, the other challenge is the supply chain. It's not just about manufacturing the test, it's all the components that go into making that test. The plastics, the buffers, the reagents, they're all in demand, and the lack of availability of many of these components is having an impact on the ability to produce the tests at the quantities and levels required. So just looking at timelines, I've just on this slide outlined a typical timeline and phases of development of a diagnostic product through, from assay design through to approval and launch. And normally this approach is taken sequentially, and it's done for a reason, because it's the best way to ensure that you deliver an effective and safe product. Usually, this takes a minimum of 2 to 3 years to go through this process. And under the pandemic, it's required to be compressed to within 6 to 9 months. So you can imagine if test development initiates in January 2020, to get a product on the market so that it can be used in the pandemic this year means that you normally have to compress those timelines by a factor of 2 or 3, which is a very, very significant challenge. And we'll talk a little bit later about how that's being addressed. Okay, next slide. Okay, looking at the scale of the manufacturing capacity scale up that's required. I've just, for one type of test, which is the antigen tests, the lateral flow antigen tests, I've just put some numbers here to give an indication of the demand and the current manufacturing capacity to show the size of the gap between the two. So in the UK, as an example, it's the government has estimated in order to reduce the R number most effectively, they should be able to test between 7 and 8% of the population every single day. And that would require roughly 5 million tests per day or 100 million tests per month. And those tests would come from all the various types of tests that are being developed: PCR tests, lateral flow tests, LAMP tests. It's really the combination of all of those that would be required to meet that type of, or that level of testing on a daily basis. And in the UK, that's called Operation Moonshot. In the United States, similar estimates, estimates that population, about 6% of the population really needs to be tested every day, and that equates to about 20 million tests per day. And I've put a link in the slides there with a link to the source of that, those particular estimates. And then in the low and middle income countries, the Gates Foundation, is looking to supply 500 million tests over the next 12 months. And those will primarily be the rapid lateral flow type tests, which can be supplied, the only ones that really could be supplied at that scale. And actually, ultimately, the total demand could be the whole world population tested frequently. So that, calculates to many billions of tests that are required. And these tests would be required at that scale in order to, regularly test the whole population so that you can quickly pick up the most infectious people and therefore reduce the spread of the virus and the R number very effectively. So that's the size of the scale of the demand. If we look at, for example, in the UK, what's the current manufacturing capacity for lateral flow tests? Well, at the moment, it's only 5 million per month. So you can see the gap between current capacity and required demand. And this is the challenge, the scale-up challenge, which is currently the industry is addressing in collaboration with governments. So is it not only is the size of the scale-up significant, can you actually scale up by many orders of magnitude in just 3 to 4 months? Is that actually possible? And one of the scale-up challenges is, who's going to pay for it? If industry invests in scaling up manufacturing and capacity for an opportunity which may not be there in 12 months' time, how's that going to be managed? How can companies be encouraged to do that? And then, as I mentioned, the supply chain constraints. The manufacturing capacity for all critical raw materials, and I mean all, and all consumables is insufficient as well. So there's shortages of swabs, of sample collection devices, other plastic consumables, antibodies, nitrocellulose strips, everything is in short supply. So the manufacturing scale-up challenge is not just for the tests themselves, it's for the whole supply chain in order to make enough material available so that you can make the tests. So it is a very, very significant challenge. So what about the industry response? So I'd like to, before I discuss this, I'd just like to lay out that, the pandemic has sort of set out a very, very different competitive environment now for the IVD industry. as I've shown, global demand far exceeds the combined global production capacity. And demand is on a scale that really only a collective industry response can address. So markets can actually accommodate multiple and all test manufacturers, and in fact it requires all and as many as possible. So everything that is produced will be sold, and it will be sold quickly. So this change in competitive environment really fosters increased collaboration and innovation. So no longer are companies competing for market share of a restricted market. The market is probably the largest market that the diagnostics industry will ever experience, which is effectively the whole world population tested frequently. So there's no fighting for market share. Revenues will be constrained more about how much can be made as opposed to how much share of a market that a company can gain. So the accelerated development and time to market requires collaboration with governments, regulators, funding bodies, and national healthcare systems. So the whole environment actually fosters a different relationship between all the stakeholders, which is a much more collaborative and innovative approach to solving this problem. Just looking at the different types of tests, in order to meet the demand that I mentioned, it's really going to require the contribution from a lot of different test types and all of them together. There are, specific tests are suited for specific use cases or settings. There's, PCR, for example, is a good test for detecting infected patients, so at-risk groups, because of its higher sensitivity and specificity. Whereas testing the broader population to enable return to normal life would require, for example, a lateral flow test, because it can be produced at scale. It can return a result quickly, and is relatively inexpensive. And that is a different use, obviously, than the PCR test, but both are required to meet the demand, because the demand is multifaceted and is based on different settings, different use cases that require different solutions. So I've mentioned why it's not just about one or two different tests. It requires all available tests in order to meet demand. And industry is responding to that through collaborations to deploy all available technologies, IP, and testing capacity. I'll give 3 examples from my own company. So Avacta and Diagnostics are collaborating to develop a mass spec-based SARS-CoV-2 test to utilize the large installed base of MALDI-TOF instruments in clinical settings. So we at Avacta, we're not mass spec company at all. Diagnostics is. We provide our very specific Affimer protein binders. Diagnostics provides the mass spec platform capability, and together we can develop a test which is run on a type of instrument which is currently utilized in clinical settings, but not at the moment contributing to testing capacity for at-risk groups. So together, by coming together, we can provide a test which then enables these instruments to be brought into the national testing program and contribute to that particular testing capacity. And we can only do that by working together. Avacta and Cytiva are also collaborating to develop a rapid SARS-CoV-2 antigen test, again combining our highly specific Affimer reagents and Cytiva's high-performance nitrocellulose strip technology to provide a rapid, frequent mass testing solution. Again, combining capabilities and technologies from 2 organizations that can't actually provide both themselves. And then finally, our Affimer reagents are used in other applications, for example, testing wastewater and for the development of a breath test for SARS-CoV-2. And that's work that's been done by UK public company called DeepVerge. So those are just some examples of the ability to combine and collaborate to combine technologies and IP to develop tests, which will then increase the testing capacity. So how are industry, governments, regulatory bodies, funding, healthcare systems collaborating to support accelerated development? I've just drawn out some examples here from the UK and the US of initiatives which are being set up and established to do just that. So in the UK, we have a program called the Condor program, which was set up with government. Government has brought together hospitals, universities, government-funded clinical research bodies, really to create a single route to evaluate new diagnostic tests for COVID-19. And this is a capability that all companies that are developing tests are encouraged to use and should facilitate access to clinical samples and clinical validation. So this was set up to accelerate that part of the development process. And it's expected that that program will continue post-COVID as an enduring asset for the UK diagnostics industry. Also, the MHRA, which is the regulatory body in the UK, they are working very closely in collaboration with industry on the development of the target product profiles for the various COVID-19 tests. So, typically industry is consulted on the development of these, but it's much more so at the moment. And those target product profiles are currently in development. Some have already been issued, some are to be issued. And there's a very, very close collaboration between the regulatory body and industry bodies to make sure that those are fit for purpose. And then an example from the US is the RADx program, which is an NIH initiative specifically to speed innovation and development and commercialization for COVID-19 testing. So these are just some examples of initiatives that are COVID-19 pandemic specific that have emerged in response to the pandemic, aimed at supporting the accelerated development of tests. What about manufacturing scale-up? There are, I know, in some countries, governments that are creating coalitions of manufacturing companies to support the early identification of key blockers to achieving mass scale-up in manufacture of components. So it's again a collaboration between governments, industry, regulatory bodies, and the national healthcare systems to identify what needs to be done, what can be done to scale up and scale up quickly. What needs to be unblocked, what resources need to be deployed, where they can come from, identifying constraints. And the intention in the end is actually to leave a legacy for diagnostics infrastructure. So the increased manufacturing capacity that will be developed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the intention is to leave this as a legacy for the industry moving forward, so that that infrastructure will continue to be deployed to serve a much stronger diagnostics market and diagnostics industry post COVID-19. Governments are offering procurement of test manufacturing equipment as one option to do that quickly, and also the provision of working capital, largely in the form of purchase orders, to help industry scale up. Innovation. The scale of this particular opportunity is driving a noticeable increase in innovation in the industry, with many new technology platforms using the detection of the virus as a proof of concept application, and then seeking collaborations to commercialize the products. And there is a need for this innovation. There is a focus on point of care platforms, so enabling SARS-CoV-2 testing to be taken outside the laboratory and into the community. As I mentioned, there's enough demand there for multiple solutions, multiple applications, and this is driving a lot of innovation. And there are specific competitions that are funding this. So, for example, in the US, we have the example of the $5 million X Prize, which is a competition specifically to develop faster, cheaper, and easier to use COVID tests at scale. And in the UK, there is a government innovation fund, £20 million, to do just the same. So what's the lasting impact of this on the IVD industry? Well, there's definitely already an increased awareness of diagnostics, and in particular the value of diagnostic testing, particularly in its ability to tackle global healthcare crises. Another example of a global healthcare crisis is the emerging growth in antimicrobial resistance. Some governments, as a result of this, want a stronger home-based diagnostics industry and have already stated their intention to continue supporting its development post-COVID-19. So many of the assets and capabilities that are developed to tackle the pandemic are expected to be continued in use beyond COVID-19, supporting a stronger diagnostic testing market and a stronger diagnostics industry. And one of the drivers for this is to ensure that industry will be pandemic ready, so that the next time we will be able to respond much more quickly to the next pandemic. So in general, while the COVID-19 pandemic has been terrible for society and our economies, it has provided an opportunity for the diagnostics industry to really emerge from the shadows of other healthcare markets and industries, and to demonstrate the value of diagnostic testing, and will emerge from this pandemic in a much stronger position than when it went into it. So thank you for listening. I'm ready to take any questions.
Thank you, David, for that outstanding presentation. We will now move to the live Q&A portion of this presentation. And as a reminder to our audience members, please submit those questions via the Q&A box. So let's take a look. We already have some great questions coming in. David, our first question is, what has been the most surprising and satisfying development over the past 9 months as a diagnostics industry professional?
I think the most satisfying is how mainstream diagnostics has become in the national conversation. It's very satisfying to turn on the TV in the morning or the national news and actually read and discussions on diagnostic test sensitivity, specificity, predictive values, deployment of different tests in different environments. I mean, that's, as an almost 30-year veteran of the industry, that has never happened before. So diagnostic testing has become mainstream. I think the value of diagnostic testing is now acknowledged. It was always, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, it's typically been undervalued and is really hidden in the shadows behind other healthcare interventions, therapeutics, and medtech. So that's great. I mean, its time has come, and that's been the most rewarding and satisfying development that's really come out of the COVID-19 pandemic over the last nine months or so.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned in your presentation that multiple testing solutions are required to meet demand and the requirements of different settings and use cases. What are your thoughts on what the mix of different tests would look like?
Okay, so there's a lot of different tests, as people know. The initial the PCR tests were the ones that were developed the most quickly. The technology, as the technology lends itself to a much more rapid development than some of the immunoassay approaches, and they were deployed quickly in labs. So PCR testing has been really the predominant testing platform that has been used up to now. It is also arguably the most accurate in terms of its sensitivity and specificity, and does a good job at identifying people who are infected. There's been a big challenge in scaling that up to test more people, but it's difficult to scale. It's difficult to scale for various reasons. One being that typically the testing has been done in laboratories. So there's a relatively slow turnaround time for the test results, and it's quite a complex and expensive process. So while it's a good test, the challenge has been getting more people tested. With the demand for testing increasing, exponentially, week by week, and the acknowledged need now to test as many people as possible, that's not going to be delivered by PCR. It's just too difficult to scale up to those numbers. So we need alternative solutions. As an example, we have at Avacta, we're developing a lateral flow antigen test, which is a potential solution for a different type of application. So the PCR test is good at diagnosing people with COVID infection, as is the lateral flow test. But in addition, because the lateral flow test is scalable, relatively inexpensive and affordable, and can produce a result quickly, within 10 minutes, it is a solution that can be deployed to test the population, mass testing. And even though it's widely acknowledged that lateral flow tests may not have the same level of performance and sensitivity as a PCR test, that really doesn't matter so much when it's being used to enable society to get back to whatever we call the new normal. So you can imagine a lateral flow test could be used quickly when someone is about to enter a sports stadium or go to work or get on a plane, and that's very difficult to do using a PCR test. So there's lab-based PCR tests. There's PCR is also being moved onto point-of-care platforms, so it's moving out of the lab into more decentralized settings, and then ultimately that decentralization will go all the way to individuals to be able to test themselves. And each of those applications requires a different type of test, but the volume will be in testing individuals, regularly, to enable them to go back to normal living and normal life, and that's largely going to be through lateral flow. So it's a combination. They're all complementary. They all have their place, and all are required. That's those lateral flow tests are coming to market, and we'll see more of them being used, not to necessarily detect everyone that's infected, but to detect the most infectious people quickly and regularly, which is the most effective way, really, to get that R number down.
Thank you so much. And what are your thoughts about breathalyzers to diagnose COVID?
Breathalyzers. Okay. Well, I know there are a number of breath tests in development. If they can be proved to work and work effectively, then that's another solution that could add to the weapon, the collection of tests that need to be deployed. We need as many tests as possible. There's space in this market for all tests and all solutions. As yet, I just haven't seen any evidence yet on how well a breath test performs. But if it shows the requisite level of sensitivity and specificity, clearly it's a sample type that could be it could be used in the community, so it could ultimately lead to a community use product. So I think theoretically, potentially, yes, great, and hopefully some of these breath tests will come through.
Thank you so much. Our next question from our audience member, and I want to thank our audience for these great questions. How can the industry be better prepared for the next pandemic?
Okay, so the industry, and not just the industry, so the industry collectively, but the industry also in collaboration with other stakeholders, governments, regulators, the healthcare system itself, funding bodies, everyone's working very closely together, very engaged in trying to find and rapidly find solutions to meet the testing demand at the moment. And some of those solutions, some of those assets that will be developed through that process will continue to be in place to serve the diagnostics industry in the future. So as an example, the Condor program that I mentioned in my presentation. This is where in the UK the government has put together a network of organisations that can facilitate the clinical validation of tests quickly. That type of asset can remain in place. So when we come out of COVID and we're back into some form of normality or getting ready for the next pandemic, those sorts of assets that were put in place to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic can work and help us become better prepared for the next one. So it's also about learning how to do things more quickly, and our success in doing that. These are all lessons that the industry can use to be better prepared. And actually, we talk about the next pandemic. There are other current global healthcare crises where diagnostic testing plays a critical role, and I think that's been recognized now because of the role in COVID-19. For example, the rapid increase in antimicrobial resistance. That's one where diagnostics play a critical role. So, I expect that the industry will come out of the COVID-19 pandemic much stronger. Also because governments now recognize that a strong diagnostics industry is a national strategic asset, and they have in the UK they recognize that what they thought was a relatively weak diagnostics industry was one of the reasons why it took the country longer to respond, and they now realize the value of having a stronger industry so that we're better prepared next time. So there's a lot of it's appreciating the value, it's building assets to enable the industry to work more rapidly and quickly with all stakeholders, and having those endure beyond this current pandemic. I think all of those things together will lead to a better prepared industry and a better prepared country.
Thank you so much. We have time for a couple of more questions. When can the United Kingdom expect the LFD rapid antigen tests?
When can the United Kingdom expect that? Okay, so there are a number of tests in development, and these tests are coming onto the market they're starting to come on the market now and coming onto the market in the near future. So the lateral flow antigen tests have been later to market. They're more difficult to develop and take a longer time than, say, the PCR tests and the other molecular tests, just because of the nature of the technology. In the UK, there is also the UK government have said that they want a sovereign supply. So they are very focused on utilizing a UK manufactured test, which is great for companies in the UK that are developing these tests. So that's why they're working with us closely to make sure that happens as quickly as possible. So over the next few months, we'll start to see those tests emerging and getting into use.
Thank you very much. What's the time scale for Avacta's antigen LFT to be readily available?
Well, that's I just need to refer really to our public statements on that. We are working very closely at the moment with our partner Cytiva and our manufacturing partners to finalize the design of the test so that it's manufacturable at scale to meet the demand. We will announce the specific timelines on that as we normally do over the next few months as the product passes through that specific process.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, what is the biggest challenge to scale up in the UK for LFDs? Is it new tooling, capacity of existing kit, and are the supply chain issues or possibly anything else to be some of the challenges?
Yeah.
Whoops, it looks like we accidentally lost him. I want to thank our audience for their patience. Every once in a while, we have a little bit of a technology issue, and I'm sure that he is going to hop right back in.
Okay, I'm back.
There he is.
I think I got the gist of that question. It was what are the key challenges to scale up manufacturing?
Yes.
Is it the kit or something else? Well, I mean, we at Avacta we're not a manufacturer. We're a test developer. But from our understanding of working closely with our manufacturing partners, it's how do you scale up? How do you increase the manufacturing capacity? It's either through putting in place additional automated manufacturing lines. Or you can scale up, more manually, and that's a matter of employing, more people to do manual assemblies and so forth. It's largely the kit. It's the availability of the manufacturing kit. You have to manufacture the manufacturing kit, so there's a timeline attached to that. And this kit, it's very specific for lateral flow tests. It's a very specific piece of kits, and the competition for this from around the world is intense. So that's really the limiting factor. However, with the involvement of governments who can procure this stuff probably more quickly than individual companies representing their national industries, I think we can address that problem somewhat by trying to get that kit developed and brought online as quickly as possible. But that's it. Again, it goes back to the comments I made on supply chain. We have tests being manufactured, but there's a lot of stuff behind that. All the components, they have to be manufactured as well. So it's not just the capacity to develop the test itself. There's a whole tail behind that of manufacturing scale-up challenges. But for the lateral flow test, it's specific to the kit, and there is a big effort ongoing at the moment to address that.
Thank you so much, David. We're out of time, but I just wanted to offer you an opportunity to provide some closing remarks before we go, and remind the audience members that any questions not answered today will be answered via email. Would you like to have some closing remarks?
Sure. I just hope that in the short time that we've had, I've at least highlighted some of the the pluses and minuses for the industry in this come out of this particular pandemic. It's been a great opportunity for the industry to highlight what it can do. It can highlight the value of the test that it develops, and also it's brought it out of the shadows, and governments now see it as a national strategic asset. So that's all very positive, and that's all something which will endure beyond this and into the future. There have been very, very significant challenges. The nature of competition has changed, but the industry has responded, extremely positively despite all of that, and we are, getting all those tests on the market that are required. the next big challenge is, can we get enough of them to market in the short time frame?
David, thank you again for your presentation today and for your important research. And I want to thank our audience for their outstanding questions. And this presentation will be available for on-demand viewing for 12 months. So please remember to share it with your colleagues who may have been interested in today's topic but missed the presentation. And don't miss out on the other presentations on our agenda. Visit the agenda tab at the auditorium for a full listing. Thanks again for your participation. Until next time, stay healthy, stay safe. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.